All right, well, it's great to be with y'all this weekend. And I'm going to be sharing from Matthew 14. So if you want to start making your way there, it's going to kind of have a little bit of a long introduction. But it's going to be on faith and obedience. And God kind of gave me this last night. I felt like last night, as we were doing the kind of afterglow, waiting upon the Lord, praying for people, that I sensed that there was a lot of people that were on the verge of something, or a potential verge of something. That God was putting things in their heart, and there was a struggle of actually stepping into it. So this message is going to have to do with a little bit of a stepping out in faith. And I'm hoping that it'll give us what we need to venture into the things that God has for us. But firstly, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 8, it says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And those that want to see God clearly need to have a pure heart. That word pure comes from katharos, and Vine's Expository Dictionary says, free from impure admixture, without blemish, and spotless. And William Barclay, he's one of my favorite kind of commentators. He's a scholar in the Greek, and he said it has the idea of just having single-mindedness, right? And so when Jesus is our focus of attention, right? When God is enthroned in our lives, we will see him. We will see him practically in the things that we're doing. We'll see him at work in our lives, or at work in our ministry. And if we aren't seeing God in our day-to-day lives, then maybe we haven't given him our full attention yet. And maybe God is going to, encourage you, convict you today to give him your full attention. We may feel that we aren't experiencing God personally, or you may kind of sense in your life that you're missing something, that God maybe has something for you and you're not engaged in it. We see him working in other people. We see him using other people. And sometimes we feel like we're on the sidelines, just watching these things. And God is prompting us to step out and get involved. I want to share a story from the New Testament that kind of illustrates this, to encourage us to keep our eyes upon Jesus. And it's when Jesus came to them walking on the water and called Peter out, and Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water with him. But the background to the story is Jesus had just got done with this incredible miracle of feeding 5,000 men, not including women and children, with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And this is one of the only miracles that's recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. And so just because of that, you can see the impact that must have had on the people that were there and on the disciples' lives, right? Incredible story. In fact, the Gospel of John records in chapter 6, verse 15, "Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone." So, these people that he had just fed till they were full and they couldn't eat anymore because there were leftovers. I pride myself that there's never leftovers, right? You can kind of see that. They've never been full like that. They don't get full like that very often. And now this man takes 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he feeds them all. And they said, "This is the king that we want." And they were going to take him and kind of put him in that position. An awesome display of the power of Jesus and the provision of Jesus. And so there's four things we're going to look at in Matthew chapter 14 in this story. The first one is the disciples' direction. They got direction. The second one is the disciples' obedience. Third one is Peter's obedience. And the fourth one is the disciples' faith, or even their confession of faith, if you will. So the first one, the disciples' direction, Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 and 23. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there. And so, after the feeding of the 5,000, the crowd is emotional. They want to force him to be king. I'm sure that the disciples were also caught up into that emotion. And Jesus saw what was taking place. And he said, you guys get in the boat and go to the other side of the lake. And he stayed behind to handle the crowd. And then he went up on the mountain to pray. And this commandment of Jesus telling his disciples to get in the boat and go to the other side is going to be a test of their faith, a test of their obedience. They end up in a storm, right? Now in Matthew chapter 8, on the Sea of Galilee, they were in the boat and there was another storm at that time. And I don't know if you remember the story, but Jesus, in this story in Matthew 8, was asleep in the back of the boat. And they had to come and wake him up and say, Jesus, don't you care we're perishing? And Jesus got up, and kind of gave a yawn, and he said, peace, be still. He spoke to the wind and the waves. And they couldn't believe that the wind and the waves obeyed Jesus. But this story here is a little bit different. Jesus isn't in a boat with them. They can't go wake him up to handle the situation. What are they going to do? Matthew 14:24. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Jesus commands them to get in the boat to go to the other side. They obey him, and they end up in a storm. How many times have you found yourself in the middle of an intense storm simply by trusting God and obeying God? This is what John was talking about earlier. When we sin in our lives, when we willfully rebel against God, we expect adverse circumstances. No, we expect to get a spanking, if you will. But when we are seeking God, we're obeying, we're doing the things that God has for us, and we're confronted with these storms of life. Sometimes that troubles us, and we don't quite understand. I pastored a church in a town called Spital, Austria. And it's a very Catholic country. God was doing a work, and we had an outreach team come over. We're going to reach out to the young people in the skate parks and so forth, and then invite them to church on Sunday. And we're going to have a barbecue after church. And we did that quite often, having barbecues after church on Sundays, especially during the summer because it was nice weather. And everything went according to plan. There were some kids that actually gave their life to Christ. And they came to church, and they were in church with us. First time they've ever been into a Protestant evangelical church in their life. And then we got out of church, and we went in the backyard, and we had the picnic tables set up. And I was always there doing the grill, making bratwurst and schofbraten, a cut of pork that I miss terribly. It was like steak. But anyway, we just had done eating lunch. So I'm back there, and the way our backyard in the church was, it was kind of an awkward place. It was in kind of an industrial area. And I'm back there grilling. And then from the side entrance, which nobody ever used because it was in the industrial portion, I see this Austrian lady kind of like marching, like a German soldier. And she walked by, and I gave her the typical Austrian greeting, Grüß Gott, which actually means greetings in God. And she politely said, Grüß Gott, and kept on marching. And she walked up behind these two boys, and I'm not exaggerating. She just walked up behind them and just went whack on one of their heads, and she went to go for the other one. The other guy got kind of, skirmished away. And he went back through, and I could see this car, and I could see the young boy walking towards this car. And I saw the father get out of the car, walk up, and just took and hit him in his head. Dropped him to the ground. They loaded up, and they left. And those boys never came back to the church. And I remember when that happened, that kind of rocked me a little bit. I mean, God was at work, and it was like Satan came into the backyard of the church and just said, that ain't going to happen here. And he took those boys out. But here's the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth. Many are the afflictions of the righteous. Count the cost. Count the cost. You give your life to Christ, you're going to go through trials, tribulation. You're going to be afflicted. But the Lord delivers them out of all as you keep your eyes upon him. The disciples' obedience. Verse 25. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a ghost. And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid. So the fourth watch of the night, that is 3 to 6 a.m., somewhere in there. The night before, they had fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus said, get into the boat and go to the other side. They got into the boat. What time, we don't know. 9, 10 o'clock at night, maybe? And they had been rowing since that time, but the wind was contrary to them. Now, in the boat were fishermen, right, who were very familiar with the Sea of Galilee and how it worked. And any other instance, they would have said, let's just head back to the shore. We'll wait until we get a favorable wind, and then we'll set out. We'll come back, and tomorrow morning we'll head back out. They rowed and didn't get anywhere. But why did they persevere? Because Jesus told them to get in the boat and go to the other side. He didn't say get in the boat and get into a storm, and when it gets too tough, to turn it around and come on back. He said get in the boat and go to the other side. I don't think anybody in that boat at that time wanted to come back and tell Jesus why they didn't obey him. Because they just witnessed him feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Powerful miracle. It had an impact on them, the crowd, everybody that was there. They began to see something in Jesus. They began to realize that there's something special about this man. They began to have the healthy fear of the Lord in their heart. An awesome respect for Jesus. Proverbs 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. But isn't this a good picture of the Christian life? There's a need in the Christian life to persevere. To obey when it gets really tough, when it gets difficult. Paul writes like this to the Galatians 6 verse 9. Let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Anybody kind of feel weary? You're at the rows maybe, you're rowing and your arms are getting tired in life. There's no option to turn around. Don't grow weary. Keep going is the message. Paul writes to the Philippians, chapter 3, 13 and 14. Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things which are ahead, I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. I keep going. Jesus is going to get us to the final destination. But we need to have faith. And we need to press on. We need to persevere as the disciples persevered that night. Jesus' timing is always perfect, right? It may seem many times like he's late, but he's never late, right? 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it. Now I'm going to date some of us. How many people remember the game The Last Straw? One, me and you. Two, yeah. It's a really silly game. When I was younger, I thought it was the best game ever, but I don't know why now that I look back. But what it was a camel with a hinge in its back. And then there was these saddlebags you put over the camel's back, and there was a bunch of straws. And you would put one straw in the camel's saddlebag, and then your opponent would put another straw in the camel's saddlebag, and you would keep taking turns until the camel's back began to give way, right? And the person that lost is the person to put that last straw in, and then the camel's back would break and everything would fall over the ground, and then you have to pick it up. Or in my case, your mother would have to pick it up. But anyway. But that's the way it is. God knows. He knows what we're able to bear, what we can take. Like he knew when to show up that night. When the disciples, I'm sure their arms were like rubber, like they'd been working out for 5 hours, taking turns at the row, and they couldn't go anymore. And then that's when Christ came. And so the picture is to hang in there, man. Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. He's going to rescue you, but he's also going to allow the storm in your life to test you, to prove you. So you know where you stand. They probably wanted to give up. It seemed impossible to them. I can't do this. I can't do it. God gives us tasks that we look at him and we look at ourselves and we say, I can't do it. It's impossible. Anything that God has for us is going to be bigger than us. And the reason is so when he does it, he gets the glory for it. And so just because you're in over your head, God is with you. The storm is intense, but God is with you. And the things which are impossible with men, Luke 18:27, are possible with God. The disciples could have confidence and assurance that they were going to make it to the other side. Because Jesus said, get in the boat and go to the other side. And they claim that. They put their stake in God's word, that promise. You're going to get in the boat and you're going to make it to the other side. You're going to pull through this. You're going to be able to make it through this storm. You, us, what we're going through today. Paul writes it this way, Philippians 1:6, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Christ. You can't complete it. You can't begin it, and you can't complete it. But he can, and he will. And we need to believe that. We need to hold on to that and persevere. We can learn from the trials that we have been through to trust God and to even have peace with God in the current storm that we're in. Jesus said it like this in John 16:13. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. You can have peace. In the world, you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. You can have peace in the midst of the storm. That's what Jesus did the first one when he was in the boat. He was sleeping when everybody else was panicking. Jesus wants us to grow, and he allows us to go through things in life that we can grow in our confidence of him. He is going to pull through. And then we get to Peter's obedience. Verses 28 and 29. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. So he said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Now, we don't know exactly what was going on there, but we do know a little bit of Peter, that he has a tendency to talk too much, right? To open his mouth and put a shoe in it, put a foot in it, right? And somehow I think when, Jesus is walking on the water and he sees him coming, he didn't know what to say. And he just said, Lord, if it's really you, call me to come. And then right when he said it, he goes, is it too late to take that back? But here in this story, Peter is going to be involved in what I call just an extraordinary miracle, not normal, right? God at various times in our lives will separate us. So it's just him and us. Peter gets separated from the other 11 apostles. And it's just Jesus and him, mano y mano. And he says, Peter, come out. Bid you come. And I think that sent a fear down the spine of Peter. But what was he going to do? He had to do it, right? But as you think about this situation, put yourself in the boat, and you have to kind of wonder, well, what were the other guys thinking when this took place? I can imagine Peter's brother. As soon as he heard Peter open his mouth, he probably just got that embarrassed feeling that you do for people. You ever get that for other people? Kind of like you may be having for me right now. Where you kind of slump down, oh, poor guy, Maybe he was just, Peter, just for once, shut up. We're having a moment here with Jesus. He's walking on the water. You've embarrassed me my whole life. Just let me enjoy this for a second. Doubting Thomas, what went through his mind? Well, that's so stupid. That's impossible. You can't do that. Scientifically impossible. Archimedes proved that. Simon the Zealot, the Zealots were, they were very zealous. They wanted to overthrow the Roman governments. They would actually, some of them would have daggers underneath their cloak, and they would, do the hit and run on a Roman soldier, trying to overthrow the Roman government. They were some tough guys, right? Simon the Zealot's probably thinking to himself, yeah, Peter, why don't you go here? Take the hanker with you, bro. You know? Let's be done with this. The point is that sometimes when it's mano a mano and God is calling you out specifically, kind of isolating you to do something, not everybody around you, Christian and everybody, will be supportive of that. When I went to the mission field, people thought I was crazy. And I was crazy, but that's beside the point. There are a lot of naysayers. But you know in your heart, no matter what anybody else is saying, you know that Jesus is calling you. And you have to be willing to step out in faith, keeping your eyes upon him. What made it possible for Peter to actually get up out of the boat and walk on the water? Be honest with me. How many people have tried this? How many people have tried to walk on the water? There's a bunch of liars, because I know more of you have. I've tried probably 5 or 6 times. You know, you get by the edge of the pool and you just look to the right and make sure no one's looking. And you step in, you know, every time you sink. And you go, why can't I walk on the water? How come Peter could walk on the water? Does he have more faith than I do? And here's why. Because Jesus told Peter, come out, implying for Peter to walk on the water. Jesus has never told me, Rod, I want you to walk on the water. If Jesus called me to walk on the water, then Jesus would give me the ability to walk on the water. And the point is, whatever Jesus is calling you to do, that he's going to give you the ability to do it. But you're not going to realize that ability in your life until you step out in faith and start to do it. It's not like you can sit in a boat and wait until you have a supernatural understanding. Okay, now I know I can do it, so now I'm going to go do it. You'll never have that. You'll never do anything. It's going to be a step of faith. Jesus called Peter to do something impossible. Peter stepped out and he did it. He walked on the water. Powerful. Could you imagine always being able to look back then that I walked on the water with Jesus. I really did it. All the other 11 guys got to watch him do it. I don't know about you, but early on in my Christian life, I had a kind of an epiphany. And I thought to myself, I do not want to be the man that always reads about what other men do for God. I want to read about what men do for God. Those are great, encouraging things. But I want to be involved. I want to be in the game. I do not want to be a bench player. And some of you have been on the bench. And God's saying, get in the game. Here's your jersey. I'll give you the ability. Well, sorry about that. Time's up, I guess. There we go. What's God doing? What is God calling you to do? Peter sang, verse 30. But when he saw the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Peter stepped out, and he was fine. He was looking at Christ. Wow, I'm walking on the water with Jesus. But then, somehow, he began to look at the circumstances. He began to see, wow, look at these winds, look at the waves. And he thought to himself, man, this is impossible. I can't do this. And he began to sink. When we step out in faith, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. And I want you to remember that a step of faith in your life will enable you to see God's glory at work. God's glory at work. Peter began to sink, right? And I guess in a sense, he failed. I stepped out in faith many times in my life. I stepped out in what I believed were endeavors that God was leading me to do, and I failed. I stepped out in other times where it was the Lord, and I succeeded. But look at it this way. Peter, though he failed, though he lost faith and he began to sink, Jesus was there to grab him by the hand and lift him up. Peter got to experience something with Jesus that 11 other men didn't get to experience. He got to experience actually walking on the water in success. And he also got to see the hand of Jesus coming down to save him in the midst of a failure. The other guys didn't get any of it. They just got to watch the glorious things that were happening with Peter. It's a win-win situation. Jesus told Peter, why did you doubt? The Greek word distazo in Vines, again, defines it to stand in two ways. Dis comes from double, stasis, a standing, implying uncertainty which way to take. That's what happened to Peter. There became an uncertainty. Again, William Barclay kind of said, why did you look at two things? And I think what Jesus was saying is, you were looking at me. Why did you get your eyes off of me and onto the situation? Get your eyes off of that. I can take care of that. Your job is to keep your eyes upon me, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. The tone that Jesus used when he said, you of little faith. What was it? You of little faith. You idiot. You're going to deny me anyway, Or was it, oh, you of little faith? Why did you doubt, Peter? You were doing it. Why did you take your eyes off of me? Come on, I'll get you. That's the way it was. It wasn't a sharp rebuke. It was a loving encouragement. And that's what God is calling us. He's calling us in a loving encouragement. Step out. The other guys are still in the boat. What are you doing still in the boat? Jesus could have said, right? Now, none of these guys grew old except for John, according to tradition. But had they grown old, say Andrew married Martha. I don't know who his wife was. But here they are. They're old and they're on their rocking chairs on their front porch, right? And Andrew says, Martha, I remember one night long ago on the Sea of Galilee. We were rowing to the other side, and all of a sudden we saw Jesus walking on the water to us, man. And I don't know, man. It just filled us with a sense of fear to the core. We couldn't believe it. And then Peter got up out of the boat, and I witnessed it. I watched Peter get up out of the boat and walk on the water with Jesus. I saw it, Martha. But then Peter grew old. Maybe, I don't know what his wife's name was. Maybe Mary, right? Common name. Look at it, how Peter told the story. Mary, I remember a long time ago, one night on the Sea of Galilee, we were in the boat going to the other side, and we saw Jesus coming to us, walking on the water. Man, we were all filled with fear, and for some reason, like I just had to say something, right? I said, Lord, if it's you, call me to come. And then he called me to come. I was terrified. But I got up because I didn't want to be embarrassed. Now, I had to do it. And I couldn't believe it. I actually walked on the water with Jesus. Kind of got my eyes up. Jesus kind of sank and everything, but he helped me back into the boat. But the point is, the story is either a personal one or it's a third person one. You're either telling the story, this is what God is doing in my life, through my life, or you're telling the story of what God is doing in somebody else and through somebody else. And I do not want anybody in this room to be content with telling the story in the third person. I want each person here to realize and to be able to say, this is what God is doing in and through my life. Finally, the disciples' faith, their confession of faith, verse 32 and 33. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. The disciples received the revelation of who Jesus is and that he deserved glory. Last time they were in the boat, after Jesus calmed the wind and the waves, they said, whoever could this be? Even the wind and the waves obey him. They answer their own question now. Truly, this is the Son of God. We know who you are now. We don't need to ask any questions. We know who you are. Do you know who Christ is? Has God given you the revelation that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God? If he has, then you can have full confidence that whatever he's calling you to do, that you are able to complete it. And as you do, as you with a single focus, a single-mindedness, step into the things that God has called you personally, then you will see him. You will see, blessed are the pure in heart. Single-mindedness, eyes on Jesus, full attention. You'll see God. You'll be able to see him at work in the things that you do. I'll close with this because I believe that God is calling some of us to make a step of faith, to venture out of the boat. And there's various areas that I think that in this room that are representative. The first one is that God is calling some of us to commit our lives to Christ. You have been exposed to Christianity. You maybe come to church. There is an openness, but you're still on the other side of the fence at times too. You're riding that fence. You're still in the world at times, and you're enjoying that. And then you come over here and enjoy Jesus, and you know in your heart that Jesus is saying, enough. Enough. I want all of you. And Jesus is calling some of us to make a real commitment in our lives to walk with him. I think God is calling some of us to a new commitment to be active in our personal growth. In other words, like I'm preaching the choir, you're all here on a Saturday to grow in the Lord, right? But there's some here that I think that God is stirring you. Like you need to get involved in maybe a home group. You need to be involved where there's more times that you can get into God's Word, that you can fellowship with other believers, that you can grow in your relationship. And you know that you've been not obedient. Maybe other things are taking priority, and God wants to say, no, I want you to do this. I want you to focus on your personal growth right now. Some of you, God is calling to lead your family, and it terrifies you to think of that. You left that to the wife, maybe. Or maybe you just left it and it's not happening at all. And you know that God is calling you to take a proactive kind of, I need to minister to my wife. I need to minister to my children. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. God's calling you to do it. And as you step out in faith, He'll enable you to do it. God is calling some to begin to serve. You've grown in your relationship with God. Now you've grown to the point where you've heard a lot of Bible studies. You understand a lot of the Word. But now you need to give. There's a time in everybody's life when you come to church to receive, first and foremost. But then as you come to receive, there's a time where God will now have you come, maybe not with the priority to receive, but to give, to pour into other people, to take what other people have poured into you and to pour that into other people. You know? And sometimes as you do that, as you figure out that that's what God's calling you to do, you might be, kind of frustrated even, maybe even a little stagnant in your Christian life, and you're wondering why. And then you come and you have this transformation of mind. I'm not going to come to receive, I'm going to come to give. And all of a sudden there's life again. You're hitting stride, that you're in God's will again. And God is calling some of us to that. So maybe you're feeling a little bit lean spiritually. You don't know why. Maybe because God's calling you, okay, now it's time to pour out. Pour it into you. Now you need to pour it out. And I think that there's some that God is calling to the next level of service. Maybe God's calling some of you to full-time ministry. And that's terrifying. That's terrifying. Because you're getting a big paycheck right now. And if you go into ministry, that's not going to continue. It's terrifying. All of these things, when God brings us to this point in our life, these different levels, these different times in our life, whenever we stand on this side and we look at that door that God's opening for us and we look on the other side, it's terrifying. Because we look on the other side of that door and we see something that when we look at ourselves, it doesn't match up. I can't do that. I can't do that. And sometimes the fear in your heart keeps you from stepping out into the things that God has for you. And I have a verse for you. 2 Timothy 1:7. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. The fear that you're experiencing is real, but it's your emotion. And God has given us fear for a good reason. But God has given us a spirit, not of fear. And the things that are on the other side of the door, the Spirit of God is not afraid of. You understand that? You're afraid of it because it's bigger than you. But the Spirit of God dwells in you, and He looks on the other side of that door, and He says, I got it. Don't worry. Just go. I'm going with you. So don't let your human emotion of fear keep you from stepping into the things that God has for you. My life verse, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 24. He who calls you is faithful, who will also do it. He's faithful, right? He's calling you. And He's also going to do it. Every stage, if you will, of my ministry, of my Christian life, there have been many doors that God has brought me to, and He's opened doors for me. In every single one of them, I look at myself and I think, I'm just a plumber. I still, to this day, have that kind of, I'm just a plumber. You know, I went back and I got a little education now, but I graduated from Continuation High School in Fallbrook. I spent the first 25 years of my ministry with a Continuation High School diploma. That's it. That's it. So that's intimidating for me. This is for God to call me to be a director of a Bible college in Austria and Hungary. I remember we used to give out diplomas at the end of the semesters, and we'd be handing them out. And I remember handing them out to the kids, and I remember thinking, man, I wish I had one of them. So I know what it's like. You feel like you're that big. I'm a plumber, bro. I'm a plumber. I'm a plumber gone preacher. And it's really kind of still the same, You're still dealing with people's crap. Sorry. Waylon, can you edit that for me? Thank you very much. So God's going to call you. You're at the door. And let's step into it. Amen?